Hi guys, thanks for checking out my new video. So this is going to be a sort of a smaller series as an aside to my RPG series. I'm using a few different tools for various things, and some of them I might not actually use in the main project, so I didn't really want them to be part of the project workflow in case they don't work out or in case I stop using them later on. So it just saves you guys a little bit of time. But I have been asked by a few people for some of the different assets or tools that I use to get a little information on them. So we're going to start off with TC2. I barely know how to use it, but I do quite like it for its ability to stitch multiple terrains together to create what you can. So as you can see here, I've made this. This is actually 4 terrains long and 4 terrains wide. So yeah, that is basically 4 by 4. And I was able to push through and make a pretty groovy map. Problem with it is that it's actually really big. So if we have a look at where our character is, so this is our standard character height for the Invector RPG that we're using, and he's right all the way down here. Now, as you can see, that's quite a bit of space. It doesn't look like it's so much, but when it is in game, things actually come out looking a lot bigger than I intended. So I'm going to remake this map and make it a little bit smaller, and I'll show you guys how I did that today. Yeah, and when we put through the Vegetation Studio over the top of that, yeah, you can really see how much there is. Anyway, so yeah, we can get something that's sort of similar to this. Again, I'm not a master of the TC2. I only know some of the basic functionality for it. When I'm developing low poly stuff as well, I do try and keep it really basic because, as you can see, this doesn't really scream low poly. You can see all of the sort of rocks and that, and it's all very smooth. There's no hard edges on the paint. Not really sure how to get that without putting on the different shader, but yeah, anyway, so this is stitching several things together. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a new scene, and we're going to come through here. Now, it should already have popped up, but it hasn't, so I'm just going to go Power of Nature Software, Terrain Composer 2. Do you want to start a new project? Yes. Now, that's a TC2 project. Doesn't mean you're actually starting a whole new project. It just means you're putting it into this scene as a new one. So now you'll see we've got the TC2 window. That is the section that we use for where we can adjust all the height and the splat and everything like that. But first what we do is we want to come over here to where it says Terrain Area. So we'll pop that open, and now you can see in the Inspector window it has our section here for creating the terrains that we're going to be editing. So first thing you want to do is you want to set up the path for where it's going to save the terrains to. When you're working on several different terrains, it's always good to separate them via their own folder. That way you don't get confused with other terrain pieces, which will come in handy when we're trying to export the terrain later on. So I'm just going to click change for that one, and we have another one here, so we're just going to go test terrain. Oop, it's 2 bars in terrain, you know. It doesn't exist. Oh, sorry. Alright, so you have to actually make the folder. My bad. Make the folder, test terrain, and now it's down there. You can just click on it and then select the folder. So now let's change to the file path. It's going to save all of the different terrain pieces in there. Terrain name terrain, we're just going to call that test terrain 1. Actually, no, I'm just going to call it Encardia low poly. I want it to be low poly, even though it's not actually going to be low poly, but that's perfectly fine. We'll ignore that. And I'm actually going to put this as 2 by 2. That way there's 4 terrain pieces. What I've noticed that even with 4 by 4, so 16 terrain pieces, it can take a long time to bake the nav mesh, which is quite annoying. I actually left it on overnight because I couldn't be bothered waiting the 10 odd minutes or whatever for it to tick over. And the nav mesh is important for the AI system that I'm using, as well as the Invector thing. But that's an aside. You can set it to anything you want. I think the maximum is 32 by 32, which is a lot. Probably don't want to use that many, but you can, so that's always great. Now this little checkbox here, I think, is the one so you can set it to, yeah, so basically you can change the values so that they're not chained together or linked. But we just want a 2 by 2, so we're going to click, before we click create, we're actually going to go down to the setup here, because I want to actually set the tile size. Now they're automatically set to 2048 by 2048 and then 750 high. I'm going to change that because I really only need the 1000 long. I usually work with just the straight 1000 so that I know each terrain piece is like a kilometre basically, or 100 meters. I'm not sure what the unity variable is, but anyway, so I'm going to set those to 1000. So that means that we're going to have 2000 along one side and then 2000 along the other side. So it'll be a 2000 by 2000 play radius. We're going to go to resolutions. I'm going to leave that all set as it is. Settings, pixel error, I'm going to drop that to 1 because we're only drawing with 4 terrain pieces, so it doesn't really matter. Tree and detailed terrain, we're not actually going to use any of that in this because we're going to be using Vegetation Studio, so I can just leave all that as it is. It doesn't really matter, at least as far as I'm aware, it doesn't matter. Splat textures, now this is where we want to start putting textures on the terrain. Now we are going to be using Vegetation Studio, so we're going to get rid of these grass textures which are blank anyway. They're blank because I haven't drawn in any of the sorry, when I imported the folder, I didn't import any of the demo material because I didn't need it. So those will actually be filled out. If you import TC2 directly and have everything, then these will already be filled with pre-done textures. I don't want them. I've got my own textures, so I'm going to get rid of those. And there's nothing in the trees, so I'm going to go to Splat Textures now. I'm going to open up the project folder. And then I've got a folder here with all my terrain textures, so I'm going to place them. So what will happen is when we create the terrain, it's going to pick the first texture and just cover everything with that first texture. So that's going to be like your base texture. I want to do sand with that one there. So I'm going to have sand, and then I'm going to move up to this really light coloured grass, which I consider more to be beach grass, then the darker grass for where you've got your darker patches of proper grass. And then we're going to bring in the dirt. It's got 2 different colours of dirt, and then I've got a redstone dirt patch, and I've got a greystone and a darker greystone. So the reason I've got these things on here now is so that they're assigned to the actual terrain pieces when they get set up. What happens is when I export these terrains later on, when I try and draw them into another program like Vegetation Studio can actually pick up that these textures are already on the terrain in the order that they're in, so it will affect things from there. So yeah, so it's good to always put them on there now so that they're set there. Same thing if you're not using Vegetation Studio, you might want to have grass details and trees put in. Feel free to put in whatever you want, but for the purpose of this little demonstration, I'm just going to put on the textures and leave everything else blank. So now that we've got all that set up, we can actually create it now. So I'm going to click Create, and now you can see I've got 4 terrains popped together, and yeah, they're all linked up. So the good thing about TC2 is that it actually does the terrain stitching automatically. So if you were working on another terrain where you're working on each single terrain, you have to actually match the edges of the terrain pieces together. So if you adjust the height on this one, you need to make sure that that exact point that it meets on the other terrain is at the same point. There's a few programs out there. I think there's Terrain Stitcher is one of the cheaper ones, and I believe that works pretty well. So if you are just looking for, manually crafting terrains, maybe just pick that one up, and then that way you can use that to stitch it together. But otherwise, TC2 has some really cool features on it, and I only know like the very basics of it, so I don't often use those features, but they are quite good. So I'll go over now just some of the stuff that we are doing. So yeah, don't worry about this message because it's just popped up from before we got to create it. So yeah, still got the terrain creator highlighted. Now we've got here, so the buttons along the side, you've got generate, auto, and refresh. So set it to auto means that whenever you make a change on these little panels here, it will automatically generate and refresh the set here. Now, depending on how many terrain pieces you have, it'll take longer to refresh each time. So you might make a minor change, and then you'll see it sort of slowly goes through like block by block trying to fix it up. So you'll make a change, and the change will appear on this half, but it won't appear on this half, that sort of thing. So it's a bit annoying, but with only 4 terrain pieces, it should be fine. So what we're going to do now is, we've got height selected, so it's ready for a height map. We're just going to click on the plus symbol down here, and this gives us our first layer that we can play with. Now it's blanked out at the moment because there's nothing on it, so it doesn't want to do anything. What we do is we click on this this node here, and this is the raw image node, so we can actually bring in the raw image. There's a set of raw files that are downloadable with a TC2 package. It's not part of the asset itself because it's there's about 1 gigabyte of downloads because they're all very high resolution raw files. But they are available for download off Mega Download, and you can get through that. If you have a look at the documentation on TC2, it shows you where you can go to the website to find those links. But we're going to just click here now, and as you can see, we've got a few of them here. We've got the flatten mask, we've got low canyon, low islands. What do we want to do with today? Hero Mountain's a pointy one. We might just use the flatten mask. I'll show you how to do that for now. And as you can see now, that's modified. So now all 4 of the terrain pieces are being affected by that mask, because as you can see, this gives us our overall thing. So every quarter of this square is one of the terrain pieces, because we've got a 2x2, so that's how it's divided. So if I move this around, so if I've got this selected now, I can move this around here, and as you can see, it's automatically updating the terrain pieces rather quickly. And you can see, yeah, where the gaps sort of move, where the different terrains connect up while it tries to readjust itself. So that's how we do that one. Now we can actually adjust the way this reads this raw file by clicking on active, and then if we move this slider bar, you can see what it's trying to do now is actually read the raw image. So it's, as we move this around, you can see how that there, the big red area gets redder and just sort of spreads out. And this is the way you can sort of adjust how it reads the gradient, or like the difference between the white and black, how it picks up in the raw image. So you can move that around to fit what you need, do that sort of stuff. Another option that you can have too, if you didn't really want to have these sorts of blocks on there, you can actually start, instead of a raw image, you can click down here and go to noise, and we can just use purlin, and you can see that gives us basically a continuous, although it says clamp here, I'll just go continuous. That gives us this image here, which we can then also adjust in the same way by doing this or putting it up the other way, and do that. If we turn that off, that'll give us that. If we want, we can actually drop down the height of that. We'll drop it down to 100, and now you can see we've got sort of roughly hills. The problem is with the vector thing is I'm not going to be able to walk up half of these things, they'll fall down in a big crack, so we can drop that down to something that's more towards the height. If we actually set that to 5, you can see that it's going to have basic height issues in it. One good thing that's with this is if I go back here, I can actually drag the character into the scene, and now you can sort of get a reference for how high the character model is in the scene. So he's now standing on the ground, so if we went to his view, we go here, it's a bit hard to tell because of the way that the texture works. It's hard to see some of the shadowing and that in it. If we turn up the intensity or turn it down, it's not really doing anything for me. Alright. Yeah, so we'll jump back here. We're going to go back to this node, and we can start doing that. If we go 10, you can see now that it's sort of, we've got a lot more billowing ranges, or purlin as it were. So now you can see, yeah, there's sort of a lot more depth to the hills that we can have. So yeah, basically the top point of these hills will be 10 high, and then the bottom point would be 0. So that gives you like enough sort of contrast and definition to make rolling hills, which is a good sort of thing to have if you're trying to make that kind of landscape. Problem I'm going to have is that I want to have some flat areas, especially because mine is low poly, and I'm going to be putting buildings and things like that on it. I want areas that are flat. Now there's several ways that you can do that. You can either add more layers in here with some masking, like the raw image file masking, and then dropping that to 0 so that it will have the flattened layer. Otherwise you can go in by hand and actually flatten things out. However, I would probably do that in not inside TC2, because you've got this auto generation stuff that as soon as you make a change in there, if you come back here and make another change, it will it'll generate all those changes again and wipe out what you've done manually on here. So it's always best to work with the raw image files and things like that. Anyway, so I'm going to not use the purlin for this because I actually just want to have flat ground for what I'm working on. So I'm going to click back here, and I'm going to change this one back to file raw image, and yeah, we're going to get that image again. Yeah, sorry, 10, so I want to set that to 100 or 1000, wasn't it? Yeah, that's going to be way too high, so we're going to set that to 200. And now you can see I've got that big hill in there. I can extend that out and make it into a large island. If I jump on here and I click on the extension part, I can move that out and see how it sort of takes up a lot of space there. Maybe I don't want it to be going high up, but I want it to sort of stretch out to the edges. Yeah, that's pretty cool. It's a little bit too much, and now you see we've got that sort of over there. So if I pop this back on, we can change the way it sets the height on the edges there. So now we've sort of got cliffs that go into what would technically be a water around the edge here. I don't really want that. I might bring it in a little bit so we do have a bit more room around. Wouldn't mind having a beach, but I could probably play around with that. Do I really want it or not? I mean, I am trying to demonstrate, but still. If we set that to, say, 10 above water, now you can see that there's really not that much of a difference between the height and then onto the beach. So we might set that to, say, 20, raises it up a little bit more, and now our edges are sort of, yeah, a bit softer, and we can actually lead them down, still lead them into water, but the water level would be pretty low. Maybe set that to 30, and then what we can do, because again it's kind of hard to tell where some of these things are, so if we actually bring this guy further to where we're standing, so we want to drop him to the 0 marker. Now you can see that, yeah, that is actually kind of deep now, because it is already over his head height. If he was standing there, he'd be able to swim underneath. If we move him up here and then place him on top, which should be, oh yeah, 10, so that's 10 at that point. Again, because the main height there is set to 30, but it's also how it's reading the scaling up height. And now we can see that, yeah, the beach will run down into the water. That's kind of cool. I kind of like that. Alright, so now that we've got our basic height map for that one, I do want to add in a few other little features. Maybe we want to put in a little bit of rocks or something like that. So to do that, we want to click on this again, and now we've got a new one. We can select a new image. I'm going to choose this little mountain island. So it's an island itself, but as you can see now, that's going to add on top of what we've already built. But it is a bit big. It's taking up a lot of the space, and we don't really want it to do that. So we're going to shrink that down just by clicking on. So yeah, there are usual tools for scaling. I'm going to turn it around a little bit so we can click on rotate. And now we can add that there. Again, the biggest thing that TC2 does that is great for me is the fact that it can have multiple terrains and they're all linked together when we're editing, because trying to do it by hand is yeah, just ridiculous and impractical. So we can set that, and that's the super high thing, because again it's set to 1000. I might bring that down to 250, and as you can see now, yeah, it's going to be there. Now these will still be quite large compared to our player character, because it is 250 units high. So we're going to click on here. Here's our guy, and now you can see that those mountains for my game are still relatively super high for him, so he's not going to be able to climb up, and that's great. That's what we want to have. So we've put that one in there. Maybe I want to have another cool mountain over in this side, or just something else, maybe even a little bit of rolling hills or something like that. So we're going to add another layer. We're going to click down here, because it's good that it automatically starts in the raw image, because it's good to work with the raw images there to get those height maps. We've got an island base, we've got another island, we've got mesas, we've got a bunch, and we've also got a hero mountain. You know what, I think we will work with mesas to pieces. Not sure how. I've had a mesa. And we're going to set that one down to say 30 again. So now it's actually just small blocky bits that are popping in there. I'm going to move that over to this side. Now as you can see, it's sort of sitting up here because of the way it runs into the edge. So that's when we want to start actually using this clamp here, and we want to try and bring that in because of the way that the raw image file works there. It's cutting off at the edge. If we go repeat, we might, no, because it doesn't quite join up together. There are a few bits there where they don't connect. So as you can see, this one here is still going to have that real jagged edge, though it doesn't seem to appear anywhere else. Oh no, there it is. Yep. So yeah, that one in the middle doesn't quite flow on. If we try rotating, it'll just give it the same thing but from a different angle. What we can try and do then is change that from a plus to a difference. Is that giving us any... You know what, that's actually not too bad where it's smooth like that. I don't mind that. Let's change that from repeat to clamp, and we'll put it just back in that little box again. Yeah, you know what? That straight line, especially for a low poly thing, doesn't really bother me. It actually kind of looks alright. We do want it to be a little bit smaller so it fits nicer on the island. And yeah, now we've got a little rocky area that we can have through on that side of the island. Maybe I don't want it there, maybe I'm going to put it over this way. So it just sort of blends a bit better with what's going on. Again, I'm going to make it a little bit smaller just so it fits on the island rather than half in the water. Just move the placement around. Yeah, I don't mind that. Maybe we want to throw in another one, so we're going to click another plus, and we want to put in this one here, we want another texture. Sorry, another height map. We want to go with, you know what, we'll put in the Hero Mountain. Hero Mountain is just a giant mountain. I mean, look at that, it's crazy. We're going to set that to 200, but as you can see, it's going to take up that long thing, so we don't really want it to spread out quite so much. We want it to be very definitive. If we put this down so we can actually get a flat top on it by cutting off the peak of where the height map sits, we can make it a little bit smaller. Sorry. We'll move that over to here, so that now we've got a mountain right here. That looks a bit crazy. Now you can adjust the height by moving it down specifically, but you see I'm going to get this weird drop off here, so I don't really like adjusting the height of it via that method. So you can see it's negative 53, I'm just going to reset that back to 0. Yeah, you can do all sorts of different things, but one of the problems that you do get is if you're using the whole image file without clamping like this, you'll get the square around where the image is, and that'll end up with like a complete flat drop, and it just looks a bit silly. But for now, you can see that we've got actually a pretty cool blend of stuff. I'm going to keep the flat surface. I really don't like the billowing too much, because I can't sort of... There are ways to do this where you can put in special colliders on TC2 to actually flatten an area around an object. I don't know full well how to use that system properly yet, so I don't use it, which is why I like to keep the flat terrain. But if you do use the billow, you can still set the system up so you can get those flat areas where you need them for if you're planning on putting a building or a location down. I'm going to move this so it's actually over the edge as well. And now you can see that will run down into the water, and so we'll have a nice mountain that goes down into the water side there rather than a beach the whole way. And I'll move it just here so that it actually covers off. Yep, yeah, I like the way that looks. So this is our island. This is what we're going to do. Now we want to start talking about putting textures on it. You can put textures in any of the other systems. You can export this now, and it will still save that texture stuff there, so you can hand paint it. Wouldn't advise doing it because in another system, the terrain pieces won't align with each other, in the sense that you can't just keep painting from one to the other unless you have another asset that does that. But TC2 handles it here as well, so we'll actually use the splat map system for TC2. I'll take you guys through how that works. Again, the same way, just click on that, click the plus button here, and now we've got our first texture, which is the sand. So now we can set up the stats for having the sand. Layering does get a bit finicky with me. I don't fully understand it enough to be able to sort of fly through it, but I can take you through, and if we come across any problems, I'll show you how I sort of do my little workarounds to fix it. One of the problems that I have with the low poly stuff on this as well is that it uses the terrain blending. So a lot of the times you'll see a sand color, but if you're using the terrain splat map for placing foliage and stuff like in the VS, you'll see that there's some sort of bleed through because basically the terrains blend together. So according to the splat map, there's grass there, but all you can actually see is the sand which goes over the top of it. So you'll get a little bit of that bleed. I don't know how to get the hard edges yet. That'll be something I can look at, but for purposes of this, we'll just try and get through how we can. So I'm actually going to change that to grass. We'll change it to the green grass. So now you can see we've got that, but of course we haven't told it exactly where to go, plus the splat's not actually set here. So you can click on this and it will go green. When that's green, that's going through part of the auto refresh, so it's ready to go. If it's red, it means that there's an error and it can't actually put it up there. If it's greyed out, then it means you're not using it. So the same as the color map and the trees and grass placement, things like that. So we're going to go here. So now we've got that fully green section there. We actually want this to be set to height. So if you see here, once we click a node, it'll pop up with a circle. So now I can move that circle around, and that way the green will only spawn in that section there. And you'll see here, it comes up, that's our splat map. It's got that green radius there. So it's quite green over there. Obviously we don't want it to be a circle. That's useful for other sections when you're setting up biomes, or if you only want a small area of the map to be affected by that texture. Going to change that to terrain, and we're going to go with height for that one. So as you can see now, it's trying to pick these points already on there that are high. So we want to try and change that around. So we want it like that. If I want to turn that around, I'm going to invert that. And now you can see that we are covering everything that isn't the rocky area with that. So now you can see the black because there's actually no textures being rendered there. But you can also see that our grass sort of creeps halfway up the mountain. So we can adjust that by just sort of fiddling with those results. So I'm going to make sure that that's all very green there, and then the rest we're going to have the grey. So I'm going to add in another line there. Now we're going to try and add the stone texture. We'll see we've got the sand texture there, which is nice. That looks pretty cool, but we're just going to change that automatically to stone, and now you can see we've got our nice stony mountains, which is pretty cool. Might even turn that to the darker stone so that we know that that's the mountain side, and we can always have another one here for the lighter side, so it starts lighter and then goes up into the darker sections, which we can actually do. I'm going to change this one here to height, and we want to stick that up and go with the height function. We want to drop that down a bit, so now we can see a little bit cleaner on the blend there as well. So that height will then be covered by the stone. We can also change that to angular, but we don't really need to because, as you can see, it's already working fine. Angular is for when you want to do like the sides of mountains different to the tops of mountains. You can pull that sort of stunt, which we might actually do with a lighter color. We'll try angular. So we can go here, terrain, angle, and now it will look for the angle of the terrain rather than the height, so what kind of slope difference there is. And we can set that again to active and just play around. As you can see here, it's affecting the sort of height map there by doing that. If we chuck it down here, make it a little bit more focused. Now you can see we can't really see much of that happening at all because it has to compete with the grass texture as well as the other mountain texture. So we can play around with that by actually putting it up above that, and now you'll see that it's sort of showing over the top of the dark grey texture. There are still points up here where it gets a bit darker grey. Doesn't really work for my low poly setting though, because it does start to sort of throw in a bit too much detail for what we need. So we want to try and change that up a bit. So let's see what we can do by adjusting the values here for the angles. So if we pop that up more, so yeah, it gives us some cool features, but not really what I want for my low poly terrain look. But you know what would look good? What if we actually switch these things around? So I'm going to switch this to that texture, and then we'll switch this one to the others. And now we've got a different look altogether. So now the colours are a lot different. Now, as you can see, so these hills here are still going to be quite hard for the player to climb, but because they are the low reaching ones, when I use the Vegetation Studio on this, I can actually have different objects that spawn on this colour of the terrain rather than on that colour of terrain. So by doing that, I can actually set what things spawn on what colours. So if I want say a certain type of rock to spawn on here that the character can mine, I can set that up in Vegetation Studio to only spawn on this colour, and that'll be where the player can actually reach. So it doesn't look too bad with that on it. I might want to adjust some of the values just to try and get it a little bit nicer. So now you can see as I'm moving that around, you can see more of it's disappearing from that section, whereas when we put it back in, that's getting brighter, which means that there is a texture there. We just can't see it properly, so that's actually this texture. So I might want to shift that up ever so slightly. Okay, so that's the terrain height. Oh, whoops, I was checking out the wrong one. My bad. That's this one here that we want to play around with. So I want to try and make less of it. But I want it to be stronger in points. So there we go, so that's sort of adjusting that to be a bit stronger. Now if we come across here, what do we see? Yeah, so we've got a little bit of the rocky stuff here. Doesn't really look right there though, does it? So let's have a look at what we can do. Well, first off, actually, I'm going to try and get that beach back in. So I'm going to click here. I'm going to click here. Now we've got sand. So now the sand is pretty much painting all over the scene. So underlying all that text to it, we want to really set this to different height, terrain, height. And we want to click that here. We want to also invert. And we want to try and back the other way is where we need to go. I'm going to try and drop it down because I don't really want anything on the island to be affected. So we want to try and minimize that. Now as you can see, we can't actually see it because there's all these other layers on top. So again, we can move this to the top and all of a sudden we've got a beach. That's pretty cool. That worked out a lot better than I was expecting, so that's good. Now as you can see here, that's sort of going to reach up there a bit. It looks pretty good on the sand, so the beach front's fine, but yeah, where it climbs up on the rocks there is a bit out of place, so maybe we can affect that a little bit. Let's click on here. So there won't be much beach space, but what can you do? I guess it's fine for what I want to do for demonstration purposes anyway. Alright, so I'm happy with that. I just sort of want to affect these little hills here. I'd rather them be more rocky than grass. So what we can do is we can get our rock layer, which is this one. Zoom in a bit here so you can see a bit better. Maybe bring that up. I'm going to Control D to duplicate that, and we're going to change this to we're going to add a node and we're going to call it the circle, so that's fine. We're going to move that circle over the top here, and we're going to move that above the grass. No, that's not what we want. I'm going to delete that. That's not really clipping it there, is it? So let's move it under the grass. I'll put it back above the grass, but we're also going to have to add node. I'm going to go change that node to terrain, height, and we want to try and move that around so that we've got that. We might actually put that there, and we'll change that to a subtract node to difference. Yeah, starting to get there. Again, I'm not the best at using this, but I know that you are able to sort of simplify how that works. I'm going to change that back to height, and we're putting it above again. How do we do this one? Change it, change it. If we invert that, it's going to give us all sorts of crazy. What if normal? No, that's not what we want. Let's try with height again. Oh dear, what's going on there now? That's a little bit better, but now we've got the problem of that sitting over that, so we're going to go back here, bring it down. Let's see. Oh, it actually does give us a cool effect at the top of the mountain there by changing the colours on it. I mean, again, for like trying to do terrain blending and stuff like that, that's actually, you can get some really cool and positive effects out of that. But again, that's not what I want to do for this low poly thing, especially because I'm going to be using it to mark out where things will be spawning. I don't want to have crazy things spawning all on the top of the mountain that aren't even accessible, so I don't really want that there. You know what, why don't we change that to angle again? There we go. See, that's a lot better. And that gets me the sort of the edges to the rocks that I wanted to have down here. Unfortunately, though, it does ruin a bit of the beach. So let's see where we can get rid of that. Which way do we need to go to modify that? Move that around. Oh, there we go. So now we're starting to clear that out. If we do that, that's getting rid of it there. It does give us a bit more grass on our little mountain here, which is annoying. So we've got to figure out how to adjust that. What we might be able to do then is I might be able to use that circular thing. So if I add a node here and we do the circle, move the circle so it's only covering over this spot. What's just happened there? Why has that gone there? Change one thing and it ruins another. But, alright, grass on the top of the mountain. So I really want that to be different. Why is that happening that way? What if I subtract? Oh, 0. That's why that was going funny. Alright. So, yeah, that was very much playing up in a way that I didn't want it to. Alright, so now we've got a little bit more of the the black terrain filtering out. And we've got sand is also fixed up there as well. That's pretty good. What if we drop that above? Is that going to do anything? If we put that on top? No, it hasn't really done much there for changing that other than adding the big circle there, which is what we don't want. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Popping it there, that's covered over. Well, maybe I'm just going to have to live with the fact that there'll be some trees and grass on top of the mountains. You know what, that doesn't even matter. Alright, anyway, done. Okay, cool. So now we've got our thing. Where's my character? He's there. What does this world look like to him? Yeah, it looks like it's doable. Let's put him down in the rocks here. So, yep, smaller rocks, still, you know, rather sort of hilly area or a big rocky area that you can run around in. That's awesome. If we put him, he's going to have a look at the beach. What does he see? Doesn't really see much sand. The water sort of cuts off a bit too far. But it just means that we just drop the water level a bit. Alright, cool. So there you go. So that's putting all those terrains together using some of the tools with the splat map and all the height maps and everything. So we're going to drop that down. Of course, you got all the other tools like the color map, the trees, grass, and then object placement. Again, I'll be using the veggie system for this one. So yeah, won't be using any of that through here. But in saying that, there is a function with the object there where you can place colliders around the object to help flatten out an area. So if you are using the sort of the purlin or the billowing mask to create some like nice sort of rolling hill area, you can actually do that. You know what? Why don't I actually try and give that one a go again? So we're going to go back to the height map now, and we're going to add in another layer. This one here, we're going to change it to that noise where we go. We'll go with the purlin. So yeah, see, everything's going to be crazy. But if we go circle, now we've actually got just a small area that goes crazy. So we can also set that to, again, we'll set that to 10. And now you can see we've got that range there, and it's confined to just that small circle area. We could also change that shape to anything else. Circle, so we go shape, circle, gradient, rectangle, or a constant. So we're going to leave that as a circle. we are going to change the size of it so that we do have some areas that are actually just green hills and are a little bit bumpy. And that'll be nice for like a little forest area, as long as it's not too high. If we get our character, where's he gone? Over here. Got to stand him in there. Oh, we'll pop him up so he's on the surface. And now you can see that's actually a nice sort of rolling hill area there. Doesn't do anything to our splat map because it's not high enough to really affect, which is great. So now we've got that. You know what, I might even add another one of those. So I'm going to Control D that one. Now you can see it's starting to sort of add to there. It's getting to the height and the angle where it's going to change the colour. But what we're going to do is we're going to move it over here. And as you can see there, yeah, as it was moving along, it was cutting across the line, causing that little that line to pop up. But when we zoom in, that line's gone because it's now refreshed itself. And I want to keep that area there small because I'll probably put a little town in there or something. Cool. Now you can also do stuff like draw paths and things on it. So if we go to, we're going to hide this for now. I'm going to go back to our splat map again and drop it down so I can actually see it. And we want to add in another layer here. This one here will be the sandy colour. Oh no, yeah, we'll make it dirt because dirt is always better. Change that to File Raw Image, and there's a couple of images that come with a pack that are actually cities and roadways, things like that. So we're going to click on this. As you can see, we can't really see it anywhere, so we're going to have to actually move it up in the hierarchy to there. Now you can see it's going to pop up over the top of everything. That is huge. So let us move that, change the size of it a little bit. I want to change it so it fits into our mountain area. So I'm going to move that there. I'm going to rotate it again because we know that this is a flat area, so I don't have to worry about it sort of being a bit weird by going on over the little mountains and things like that and having weird shapes in it. But we've got that there now. Now I need to make sure that that size actually matches A, the buildings that I'm going to be placing on it, but also the people that will be walking around. So it needs to look like it's normal. It also is a little bit blurry on the edges. You can sharpen that up by going here, adjusting the values. So as you can see, that's getting a lot worse, so we want to try and adjust it the other way. It's having a bit sharper. Hasn't really made it that much sharper, has it? That's certainly more sharp doing it that way. Or just turning it off. Whatever, it's sharp enough, shut up. Characters, we're going to get our character just to make sure that it is actually the right size for what we want. We're going to move our character in there just for reference purposes again. So if we'll have to drop him to 0. No, that's too big. Pop him up so now he's standing on the surface, and we'll pop him out onto a roadway. You know what, I can do with being a little bit bigger. I have noticed when I did this last time I made it a bit too big, and it was certainly bigger than it needed to be, but I might just increase this slightly just so it looks like there's a bit bigger, like an actual road rather than not a road. So that ought to do. Yeah, it seems to come out a bit bigger even when using this guy for reference. But hopefully that's enough. Might want to stretch it out. Oh, that's too much. Now I've shrunk it down again. And we'll just move it away from the mountain, or at least I thought I would. Oh, moving it on the wrong angle, that's why. Click on the green, not the blue. And yeah, so you can see over here that this little patch actually runs over a slight bump in the hill. Not going to worry too much about that. I can put something fancy there later. But now we can see that it's certainly a lot bigger. If we grab our little reference character, going to move him here. You have to have a look in. Yeah, you know what, I'm happy with that. I'm going to dress it up later on anyway, so it'll look different when all the buildings and such get put in there. Yeah, this little patch here is also up on the hill. Not too fussed with that either. But anyway, so that's a little layout that we can use for our city. We can also draw in roads and things like that. I'm not going to do that with this one. What you'd probably want to do is you'd want to export that splat map, or the height map, sorry, the overall height map if it looked a bit better than that. Oops, Control Z, 750. Yeah, maybe even the splat map might be easier to do it, and then bring that into a program like Photoshop, and then just draw over the top of that where you want those roads to go, and then you can bring that back in as its own raw image file, and then yeah, lay that over the top so that you have all your roadways set out. For this, I'm not going to bother with having roadways. I might draw them in manually later. Again, like I said, when you're drawing across several terrains, it's going to be a bit of a problem, but I'd prefer to do it that way than try and figure out how to get a raw file, the right resolution, all that sort of stuff. Anyway, so let's now export this to where we want. Oh yes, so you can actually export the terrain height map, and possibly even the splat map too if I click on splat. Yep, so yeah, you can actually export it as its own file, and then use that again in Vegetation Studio, that sort of thing. I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to export this so that I can drag it into Vegetation Studio, and I'll show you how to do that. First thing I want to do is I want to click on the terrain area. I'm going to actually remove, I'll close this panel because we don't need it anymore. Close tab. Remove component, that's gone. Remove component. No. Oh, so I'll delete this because we don't need that anymore, and it will try and ask me for more scripts. I think my camera's playing up a bit now for some reason. I'm going to just save this scene for a second. Save scene. Test terrain 1. Cool. So now that's in. Let's have a look. That's all fine. So our terrain area is that. We've got sections underneath it, and it's got here these terrain settings, so I'm going to click all those. I'm going to get rid of this. The reason I'm removing these is because when I bring it into the other program, I don't want to have TC2 installed for it to work properly. All I want is just the terrain and the textures, and that's all I need. The other program will handle what I do with the terrain, so I don't need any of that special stuff from TC2. The reason you have it there with TC2 is because it's got a built-in world's rendering system, so when you move around it won't render, you know, things that you can't see, that sort of stuff. So that sort of saves it there. But again, I'm not using the TC2 program to do this. I just want the terrain pieces that I've crafted with their heights respective, all that sort of stuff. So there we go, that's ready to go. Now what I want to do is I want to find the folder that I've put it in, which for this one was test terrain. And if we bring up the project folder here, so you can see these are all the actual terrain pieces. There were 4 of them, but I want to drag that in as a prefab. It's important that I actually do this because this will now set it up in the way that it's aligned. If I just drag those in, I'd have to manually place them on the scene to get it right, and then you'd want to be trying to line it up. Easy just to have the prefab already done and ready to go. So now that I've done that, I'm going to go edit, going to go, sorry, assets, export package, items to export. So now you can see that it's just picked these things that are in the scene, so because I've got this folder selected. So it wants to do the textures because I'm going to need the textures to go with it. I've already got them in the folder, but if you're going to export this and use it in another one where you might not have those textures, put in the textures with it. Yep, so we've got the prefab, we've got the actual terrain pieces themselves. We're going to click export, and we're going to save that into our folder. So yeah, terrain comp, unit package, test terrain. And there we go. So now that's set up through there. You've got your terrain piece that you can open up as its own little package and import that into the new project. So that's how you use TC2 to create terrain in the most basic sense. Again, there's a lot more features. You can check out their YouTube channel for yeah, all of the different you know, tutorials on how to do the different stuff. Anyway, I hope that was enough to show you guys some of the real sort of basic way that it puts things together. And I'll make another video soon where I'm actually going to use this terrain piece with the Vegetation Studio, and then I'll make another one with Emerald AI as well. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you guys check out the rest of my videos, and hope you guys got something from this. Thanks for watching.